Let me find my. All right. Here we go. All right. So. All right, so I would like to call this April 16th, 2021 workshop meeting of the Medfield School Committee to order with a roll call, please. So Tim Knight.
Here.
And Megan Glenn.
Here.
Anna Mae O'Shea Brooke.
Here.
And Jessica Riley here. Leo Brem has informed us that he will be a few minutes late and he will zoom in as we get here, but we do have quorum, so we'll open this. I just want to quickly review the agenda and do some introductions and review some of the norms of a workshop format, because it's a little different than our usual business meeting. We are going to be discussing a standards-based review feedback, specifically in reference to a research project that Dr. Power conducted last year, just before the shutdown of regarding the implementation of standards-based reporting at the Blake Middle School. And a workshop format is generally meant to allow the committee kind of, and through observation, the community to kind of better understand a topic of specific interest. We're not going to take any action on this topic today. And in fact, it does not really fall under school committee umbrella of things that we would take action on. It's simply a matter of interest to the public and to us. And we will not be soliciting public comment within this meeting. If you have public comment, and I'll mention this again at the end, I would encourage you, after you've watched, I would encourage you to solicit that to Dr. Power, Dr. Marsden, or Mr. Vaughn. With that, I will ask, I don't know, Dr. Marsden, would you like to do introductions?
Sure. So before that, I just want to talk a little bit about, kind of frame this conversation in the workshop on why we're doing this and why I asked Christine to look at this. So I think, the standards-based reporting isn't anything new. Over 25 years ago, I was involved in this work as an elementary school teacher, and I think a lot of elementary school teachers were doing that work back then. And I would say that from a teaching perspective, an educator perspective, that they're really, it is a great way to give feedback on what kids actually know and what they're doing. However, the caveat to that is it needs to be in the correct context. And I think sometimes the context works very, very well, and other times it can be challenging. So I think, one of the things that I wanted to find out in this project, because I'd heard lots of feedback from most of you, and then former school committee members. This has been a 5-year kind of implementation. I've got lots of feedback from them, and they were getting feedback from parents and giving it to me. And I've also gotten feedback from teachers on this initiative, and then certainly we've all heard feedback even at the school committee level from students on that. So I think it was the issue was ripe. It was time to really take a look at it from an independent lens of, okay, let's get feedback from the three stakeholders. Let's look at what the parents think, teachers think, students think, get a sense of how it's going, because the concerns that I started having was that the issues that I was hearing in year 1 were the same issues I was hearing in year 2 and the same issues I was hearing in year 3. So even though there was lots of parent workshops and communication from Blake Middle School, the issues weren't changing. So to me, that there's a problem there when we start to have the same issues over and over again, whether it's from parents or teachers or from students. So that's why I really wanted to have Christine as her first thing when she came in, is to really take a look at this in a real objective way, to not only rely on the research and what it says. And again, I'll say it again, that if you want to look at a way to inform students on where they are and what they are doing, standards-based is a great way to do that. However, there are other things that come into play. And it has to be the correct context, but it also has to be a cultural piece too, with not only within a school, but within the community and expectations within the community. And I think a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from parents and everyone on this video right now and everyone that's attending this can understand this, is that we've all had our own personal experience on how we got to where we are. And we all have a prescription on how to get where you are out of high school or out of middle school or to college. And that prescription for probably 95% of the people live in this town is you work hard, you get good grades, you get into a college, you work hard there and you get a good job. That's why people move to Medfield. So when you're going to go against that prescription, and it's going to be problematic for people. When people are asked to explain a 2, they want to know what it's an A or a B. That's how they went to school. That's how they got to the school they went to. And that's how they, in their mind, succeeded. So, I mean, I think that the context issue is really important here, because when you're looking at an elementary setting, there isn't as much focus on grades as it would be in a middle and a high school setting. And everyone, whether you're teaching 2nd grade or teaching 7th grade, you're always building for what the child does next. And when you're in middle school, you are building to get kids into high school. And this has nothing to do with what the high school does and their grading. And this is a fact of a feeling that people have had based on their child's experience, their own experience, and as a teacher, their professional experience of preparing kids to get to the next level. And that's what we do here. That's what we do in Medfield. That's what we do in K-12 education, is that we work hard to prepare the kids so they succeed at the next level. And I think that's one of the key things that we have to remember during this presentation, and of course the report that Christina put together, is what the community, the stakeholders, the parents were questioning. And I think most of you on the screen right now have also questioned that, and whether your own children or the fact that you've gotten feedback from the community. So let's keep that in mind, that this is really, standards-based is good stuff, but it's good stuff in the right context. And with that, Christine, please start your wonderful presentation that outlines the great work that you did in this project.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you on this snowy day. Let me just share my screen and I'll get started. Yes. Okay. Thanks so much. So just to just reiterate, when I came on board, which was in August of 2019, I was asked to take a look at the standards-based reporting practices at Blake and really get an overview of what was going on, and also reach out and talk to the stakeholders in terms of the greater impact. And so this report is the culmination of that. And so I will be sharing the different aspects of it as we move on. So here's the 2 research questions that I was focusing on. Was, first of all, to understand how SBR is conceptualized and operationalized within Blake Middle School. So there's 2 different things there. It's not only how it's working, but it's also how it's understood by the Blake Middle School and the teachers themselves. The next question is then to the greater community, specifically, what is the greater impact? And Jeff articulated the 3 different stakeholder groups that were focused on that, the teachers, the parents, as well as the students, and not only in Blake, but also as they move on into the high school. So there's a lot of research on this. I'm really distilled it down just to give the broad overview. In terms of, there's a lot of research talking about the strengths of SBR, that standards-based reporting is an incredibly authentic assessment. It connects standards in terms of what students should do to what are the actions for them to demonstrate that. So there's no superfluous items there. It is, how do students demonstrate mastery? And therefore it's very authentic. And a lot of the supporters mentioned things like, this is very something that in the workplace and other places as well, that demonstrating mastery of skills, and the skills are articulated through standards. It also supports various levels of critical thinking. It's not only how they demonstrate, but how do they go about that? What are the different ways? It is not necessarily like a rote recall test. There's many different ways that students can demonstrate understanding, and standard-based reporting supports that very much so. The third piece is that also the inclusive piece. It's that flexibility in demonstrating that not all students take tests well. So standard-based reporting allows a variety of different ways for students to demonstrate understanding. It also is, the focus is on understanding, therefore it's not on the test itself. It is, if a child does not perform well, it does not reach mastery, that they have other opportunities to demonstrate knowledge. And so there's this feeling of you can enter in a variety of different ways and demonstrate knowledge in the way that best supports the child. So in that way, it's very child-centric. There's a couple of bugaboos though, and that is the pieces that make it a challenge. It is, as Jeff mentioned, it is something that's very common in elementary levels and much, much, much less common in middle schools and high schools. And the reason why is the following three things on the right column. First of all, it's very difficult to operationalize. There are a lot of moving pieces with this. It is not only the teacher education, the parent education, the supporting students and having them learn about it, is creating the structures in terms of just the reporting models, creating the rubrics, just the outsourcing, and just making sure of how that's codified. All those different pieces makes it very difficult to operationalize. It's also incredibly time consuming. And there's a couple of different things in that. First of all, is that operational piece, right? It's the development of those rubrics and developments of really thinking about multiple ways that students can demonstrate mastery, right? And so there's a lot of thinking and rethinking of practice, which is incredibly good, but incredibly time consuming the same way. But it's also, besides that nuts and bolts piece, it's the providing students opportunities to demonstrate mastery and doing it in multiple different ways. Is it opportunities for children to redo and take assessments again? Is it an opportunity for them to recalibrate, teachers to recalibrate and to rethink how they're capturing student mastery? And that takes time. And the third thing is that this is the cultural piece, and it's a big one. It is different. It is culturally different from traditional practices. In our culture, and this is the American culture, the abroad across, we have a culture of A, B, C, D, F. This is a common language that is known throughout the United States, that it's in movies and it's in books and it's what parents have had. It is something that is just the common language. So to introduce something that is very different from that and different measures of that, it's this tension that is created on that. And so for that reason, and I'm setting the stage because this slide, I think, encapsulates much of where this presentation is going to go. There's so many strengths that will be highlighted, but there's also those pieces on that right column, the difficulty to operationalize, the time consuming piece of it, and also that cultural piece that makes it a challenge. So I was, as I said, I was hired in August, and starting September, I had an opportunity to start collecting data. And the research design was a mixed methods survey, which is survey, interview, focus group, and artifacts. And I had collected data starting early September all the way to March 2nd. And if you keep in mind, that's about 10 days before we shut down. I want to make this very clear that the data that was collected is a snapshot in time, reflects a pre-COVID environment. And there was a lot of thought that went into whether or not to continue data collection beyond through the COVID era. And it's realizing that we are going back to a pre-COVID environment. And also with all the pivots, all the switches, all the things, there'd be too many things going on at the time. So I present this work, I present these data, knowing, and I'm making it very explicit, that is a snapshot in time, looking at that period from September 1st through 19 through March 2nd, 2020. So what does that mean? It means that program adaptations can and have happened since then time. And also that we should really take that in consideration, that some of the recommendations or some of the suggestions that are made, that things may have been attended to. For instance, the SBR was adopted throughout the entire school, and the report cards, which I'll talk about, were modified since then. So again, I would like you just to have that in consideration as we go on. This is a snapshot of the scope and the span of all the data that was collected. Again, it was a mixed methods study, and it captured in various different ways, different opportunities to share their experiences. You'll see the survey data looking at middle school teachers, the department chairs, Blake Middle School parents, high school teachers, Blake students, high school students, which are alumni, and they were teased out specifically to make sure they were alumni who had experiences with SBR, as well as high school parents the same way. It was teased out for that reason. And so you'll see that. And on top of that, multiple focus groups were held, and these were held in ways to make them most accessible to all the stakeholders. 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students were selected at random. And thanks to the amazing team at Blake, that they were not only selected, that the time was taken out, and I had an opportunity to meet with them in the library and talk to them as grade level groups. On top of that, 2 sessions were held with middle school parents, one during the day and one at night. And then also opportunities, one in the morning, one in the afternoon with Blake middle school teachers. I also had opportunities to meet with various different folk one-on-one, including administrators at Blake, as well as teachers. And these teachers self-selected. They're the ones who reached out to me and asked to speak to me directly, and I met with them. And then there's various different artifacts. A number of folks reached out in various different ways, emails, letters, phone calls, in order to make sure that their voices were heard. And so those were collected over time, and their experiences were noted as well. So as I start to basically share the data and the results of the data, I really want to lay this in a foundation of Blake. It's really important for me to say that Blake is a community of learners, and it's very mission focused. I've had multiple experiences in my career working with a variety of different schools, and their commitment to their mission and their commitment to their community learners is commendable. It is this community that is there, that is really thinking about students. And that is the catalyst for setting up the standards-based grading. They're looking for a connection between who they are as teachers and what they do. And so just laying that landscape, and then as this unfolds, we'll talk about that connection a bit. So the implementation itself, it was standards-based reporting was in place. This is as of March 2020 in Medfield public schools, elementary schools. And it's something that's been for a while, and they've actually just completed a report card review committee themselves, focusing on standards-based reporting. So it's something that is not new to Medfield. In Blake, it's been around for about 5 years, and it was started by Nat Vaughn and individual teachers. And it really grew organically with more and more groups, really learning about SBR and implementing that. And as I mentioned before, its use within middle schools is unusual. So survey data indicate that 89% of folks at Blake were using SBR as part of their daily practice at that time. And the model that they adopted, and there's a couple different models out there, but they did a 3-2-1 with 3 equaling mastery. So data results and the analysis indicate the following. First of all, there's an incredibly strong focus on standards and assessment at Blake. Focus on standards, focus on people. We're talking about what is taught and why is it taught? How is it connected to the standards? Now, this is something that I will be talking about in June, I believe, when I start talking about the landscape of over the past year. But I do want to highlight that these conversations were definitely happening then as well, and really focused. A lot of the conversations I had or within the survey open-ended talked about people really thinking about what they're teaching and getting rid of the extraneous stuff and really focusing on the standards themselves and not only what is taught, why is it there, and how is it connected. And then that relates to the outcomes, right, to the assessments. How are students demonstrating mastery? And we're providing them multiple opportunities to do so in various different ways. These are conversations that are happening that showed up in the qualitative data, and it's also is mentioned in the quant data as well. The second piece is a strong focus on equity and inclusion. It is what ways the students demonstrate mastery. There's an understanding that not everyone takes tests well. So how do people demonstrate? How can they have students and support students that way in terms of they need to demonstrate, well, maybe we can do a project or we can do a test, or maybe we can think about a different way. What are opportunities for kids to, if they did not meet mastery, how can we support them to meet mastery? So these are conversations that are happening within the teachers are really thinking about that. And that is pretty special in terms of their thinking of teaching and learning that way. And then again, I just mentioned in what ways can teachers support students. So it's really thinking about teaching and learning in a really deep way. The other major piece to really think about is, and laying the groundwork here, is that you have three different stakeholders. And the three different stakeholder groups are the teachers, the students, and the parents. And their impressions and their reflections on SBR at Blake are different. And that's something I'm going to share with you in a moment. Now, you'll see here the three different groups. I do want to tease out in terms of the three larger groups, or teacher, student, and parent, and then break that down a little bit more fine grain. There's the teachers, there's the Blake teachers, and high school teachers were also surveyed for this. The students with the current Blake students, as well as 9th and 10th grade Blake alumni who have gone through the system. And then you have your parents who are Blake, current Blake students at the time, and then high school parents who had their students go through the system. So just a couple of highlights. There's a lot of data within the report itself, so I'm just going to glean some of the highlights. Blake teachers are in generally supportive of SBR. I have two different measures here, and I'm going to show the next two slides. This one asked how much they like or strongly like SBR, and I collapsed those two columns just to really indicate right here that you really have, in especially in grade 6, incredible support for SBR. And the second question, which teases the same question a little bit of different ways, is how likely are you to use SBR or use SBR with modifications? And again, for the sake of this slide, just to really collapse that into whether they'll use SBR or want to use SBR, or they want to use SBR with modifications. And you'll see that again, and it mirrors that 6, 7, 8. But you'll see that there, that in general, Blake teachers are incredibly supportive of this. Blake students, I did not do a quantitative catch because we're working with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers with students, excuse me. And so having a focus group that they had an opportunity to teach was the best, to speak and talk was the best way to really get their impressions of this. And so based on those 3 different focus groups with students, the students have a good overall understanding of SBR concepts. They talk about meeting standards. They talk about the 3-2-1 scale. They understand on how they're assessed, and the ability to meet mastery can be attained a variety of different ways. This came through incredibly well as they appreciated being evaluated holistically. One student mentioned, I'm not just a percentage, that they are, what they can do versus how they performed on the test was valued, and they really felt that. When you look at that, I broke out the data between the 3 different groups, and I looked at it, and I noticed that there was a trend that in 6th grade, the kids are really supportive. And that's not definitely part of that they're coming from that environment in the elementary school. So they're in 6th grade, they feel really supported, they really like the SBR. But that support declines as kids get older. And there's a couple of different things that came out in the focus group conversations. One of which is motivation. In terms of, they spoke specifically about that the 2 and the 3 didn't feel substantive enough in terms of that piece. One student talked about there's a pride factor there in terms of it's saying I have all A's has a different weight to it than saying I got all threes. So that motivation is definitely a piece. They also talked about this need to do well for their parents. And so as I talk about that with parents, keep that in mind, that motivation is not just intrinsic. And Blake teachers had a great conversation about that whole intrinsic piece in terms of students learning for the sake of learning and encouraging that learning. Students were like that as well, but they also talked about the need to get the approval from their parents. There's the second piece, the second bullet there talks about the lack of precision. And that's specifically in relation to how they're doing the rest of the class. There's this feeling of like angst and unease that in some students of not being sure, and then that lack of understanding of what a 2 is. The 2 is approaching standard. What does that mean? And here's where it gets challenging. You can take a standard and really tease it out into its different elements and really get to that focus. But at that point, your grade report gets really long. Or you can really open up that standard and make it broader. But unfortunately, then you have a lack of precision. So it's not this crazy long grade report. However, then you have a lack of precision in terms of what is a 2? What is that approaching standard? And I heard that over and over again in terms of that 2, the concept of the 2. It was this inability to, this is the third bullet, of comparing across context. They're not sure in terms of, there's a feeling, and this is a perception, that it would be easier to compare how they're doing across science and math per se, if there was the same sort of structured grading system, whereas they just felt that with the different standards and the different way of wording, there was just no way of comparing. And that was a challenge for them. And also there's a feeling that they're not sure if, like for instance, the concept of a precision error, that in math class, there's a concept if you understand the concept, but you get the answer wrong because you made a silly mistake or a small mistake, but you understand the concept as well, you could still earn a 3, which would be mastery. There was a feeling of, how do they know that? Is that being equally measured? So that came through as well. And then that fourth piece is that difficulty sharing work with parents. What the conversations came out as is that the students are really the ones who are really sharing the work when they bring home their work, and they're the ones that are explaining it. Now, there are numerous opportunities for parent education that happens and in a variety of different ways, but it's still, despite that students are explaining what SBR is to their parents, and that they're feeling that in some cases parents don't understand, they don't get it, or they're just sort of numb. And that, I would say, goes to the lack of intuitiveness, that there's just not this is not the same culture that the parents had been in. So it's not something that they know in the deepest of their heart. So they're looking at this and they're trying to wrap their heads around it, and the kids are trying to explain it. And so that's just something that came through in the focus group conversations. Blake alumni were surveyed, and the data was teased out in terms of making sure that students had experiences. And I will say that students at the Blake alumni level, this is 9th and 10th grade last year, they had different levels. Keep in mind that SBR was rolled out in a very organic way. So you have students with differing levels of exposure to SBR, and my survey is not as fine-grained as that and couldn't capture to that level. But these are all students who self-identified having experiences in class as students with SBR. And so what they're saying mirrors a number of things that came through, especially in 7th and 8th grade in those focus groups. You have that concept of motivation, and that's that tension between that intrinsic versus pleasing mom and dad or their parent or guardian. You have that lack of precision, specifically around that concept of a 2. You have this perceived lack of rigor that a 3 is seen as, since you can have multiple times to get there, that it's seen as a lack of rigor. And also this fear of a lack of experience with the traditional scale. They know that high school has a traditional ABCDF scale. They know it's coming, and they understand it in an abstract way, but they're not really sure of what to expect. And there's fear over that, of whether or not high school is already for them a conceptual step up. And then they had this layer on top of that. So as I said, this was a survey. This is just one of the questions I asked. It was desired to receive feedback in SBR format. What you'll see, and this is from 9th and 10th graders, is that 74% would like to receive grade feedback only. Another 7% would receive a grades-based feedback, however, would like to learn more about SBR. So if you look at those combined, you have about 81% of those folks in 9th and 10th grade who are really leaning towards a grade-based system. The third stakeholder group were Blake parents and high school parents of kids who went through Blake. And you'll see here, I broke it down. I had two separate surveys. So I sent out one survey to current Blake parents, and then I sent another one to 9th and 10th grade parents, but I asked the same questions. So that's why you'll see them combined here, because of the exact same wording of the questions. And I broke it down by grade 6 and grade 7, grade 8, and then 9 and 10 are combined to see the trend line. And you'll see here, the two questions they asked was focusing on how much they liked. It was a 5-point Likert scale. On the first question is, do you strongly dislike, do you dislike, are you neutral, do you like, or you strongly like SBR? And you'll see the trend right there across. And then the second question asks a very similar question, just with a slight twist. How would you like to receive information? And again, 5-point Likert scale. You would very much like, neutral, not like, or very much not like, and to receive traditional grades or grades with some information about SBR. You'll see that as well. So you're seeing, if you're looking at it, you have about 50% of parent population that answered to the survey are saying that they're challenged by SBR. So to summarize in terms of the Blake and high school parents' ideas of concern, the qualitative data provided a lot of this. This is more than just answering that survey piece. Is through those focus groups and through especially the open-ended responses from the survey. A lot of information was shared from parents about this. What came through is, first of all, there's a overall lack of understanding or confusion about SBR related concepts. Keep in mind, they understand it on a real basic level. I mean, they get the concept of 3, 2, 1 in the scale, and that's that parent education that's definitely happened all along the way. But what's happening though, there's another layer on that, and that's, for lack of better words, I'm calling it the intuitiveness. You have the culture of parents that are centered around grades that they grew up with themselves, that is in the greater American society. And so they had that is something that they know in the deepest of their hearts. And although they're getting this information about the 3, 2, 1 and about SBR, it's just not intuitive, and it's incredibly challenging. A parent used the concept, and it really stuck with me. And the concept they talked about is as if it's a new language, and as if it's something that I don't have to think about, that I'm speaking English right now, I don't have to think about. But if you're learning a new language, then it's just much more challenging, and it's another layer. And so with that, they talked about the difficulty in supporting their child, that they don't have the same language to communicate. Therefore, they're feeling that it's difficult to support their children. The second thing came through is the fear about the transition between SBR and the traditional system at Medfield High School. There's a feeling that there is grades, and that the lack of exposure to grades up to that point will provide this pinch point at grade 9, where students are in 9th grade, where the high school transcripts are going to colleges. And then they're learning this new way of assessment. And at that point, that pinch point is a real fear. And I don't say that word lightly. It's definitely come through that the parents are afraid that that ninth grade pinch point, that the kids will get it, but they're learning as they're going when the transcripts are going to college.
And just Christine, to that point, you and I have talked about this as well, that to my former point of how we're always building to the next level, you know, colleges haven't changed and there's no indication of them changing with this. So again, it isn't a high school thing because we need to make sure that our kids are set up to go to the next level. And, you know, colleges are starting to look at the testing and the SATs and all that, but what they've done is, and I went through this process last year with my son. So yeah, we're gonna be test optional, but we're gonna look more at what your grades are. So they on one hand, they say that they're gonna be a test optional and they're not gonna focus so much on test scores, yet they then focus on more of your grades to whether or not you're gonna get into college or not. So it's always that level above, you know, that's driving what's going on below. And until colleges make those changes, we're not gonna be making changes at the high school level anywhere in the state of Massachusetts or anywhere else until it doesn't set our kids up for a negative experience when they try to go to college. That's my former point of we're always working towards the next level. And I think that's where some of this fear piece is coming from parents is, you know, working towards the next level, all of a sudden they get into ninth grade and it's very, very different assessment process.
There's the other two pieces that came out from that. And there's a perceived decrease in motivation that they feel as parents that they see with their kids regarding the lack of grades. It's that lack of precision. And it's this odd thing for me to say because SBR provides incredible amounts of precision in some ways in terms of that it's aligned to different standards. But the perceived openness of, for instance, that what is a 2 approaching standard, it's too large, it's too nebulous. And in parents' perceptions, that there's just not enough to finiteness for them to say, what do I need to do to improve? And then the concept of a 3, not really, their kids aren't really seeing it being anything. So there's that lack of motivation as well. And the fourth piece is more, I would say, the lower hanging fruit / easier one, because it's a little more concrete, is the operational issues regarding that. And that's the format and lack of uniformity and implementation. Keep in mind with any sort of ed change that there's a way of rolling things out, and teachers needed to learn and learn this in different ways, and they were conceptualizing and they were modifying and they were changing. And they have to be commended for that. The amount of thought and reflection and time and commitment is huge. And that's to everyone in the Blake teaching community, including its leadership. But in doing that, in order for them to think about what are the standards that I'm measuring and what do we value as a team, whether it's the math team or the science team or whatever it is, and what are that's going to look like. They're creating these report cards and they're looking at a way to best share that. And the end result was parents were receiving 5, 6, 7 page report cards, each page being a different subject level with different standards. It was just this lack of uniformity that some parents were like, whoa, there's a lot of information overload. And there was a lot to absorb. And so that came through. So that was more operational, more than that systemic / cultural piece. So recommendations at the end of the report, there are 4 recommendations. I'm going to be talking a little bit about them today. Keep in mind that they are suggestions based on the data collected. So these are suggestions, and the other thing I think is key is that it's important to focus that it came out, the question was not which type assessment system is better. That SBR, and this came through loud and clear in terms of a way to support learners and focus on standards, and all those pieces that I talked about earlier were there. Again, the commitment from the teachers, it's all there, but this is not a conversation around that piece. This is not which one is superior, which one is better. The conversation really is in looking at the whole, the data set collected, really looking at this is what's going to happen to make this work best for Medfield Public Schools. And so the suggestions that were formulated are based really around that. So again, we're revisiting this quickly because I wanted to keep this in mind. There are 3 different stakeholder groups here, and all of them are important. They're the teachers, the students, and the parents. And so keep in mind that this was the real issue here, is that we have differing level of support for different reasons why. And how do we really attend to those folks who are really challenged by the system, the SBR system that has developed at Blake? So the first recommendation has to do with professional development. Love professional development. I could always suggest professional development. It's because professional development is an opportunity for learning. And so here specifically talking about 612 teacher education, focusing on assessment design and calibration. For me, I don't think there's ever enough opportunities for teachers to really think about assessment and how assessment connects to standards and what they're teaching and how they're teaching. And so to do that, but the thing here is focusing on 612. We have to have an acknowledgement that we're looking at things from a 612 lens and that they're connected. Those experiences are connected. And it's really, for me, and specifically looking at this, is looking at authentic assessment practices. How are we measuring what students need to know? And what ways are we doing it? And how are they authentic? How are they demonstrating knowledge? And so looking at it from a 612 lens would support a more vertical alignment of assessment practices. Currently, we have one set at the middle school and another at the high school, and it's really those need to be really bridged, and conversations need to be spoken about and really looked at from a 612 perspective. Second one's pretty straightforward, and the third one's going to relate to this. Streamline the reporting. So the report cards across the disciplines share common attributes. They have to have the same feel and the same look and the same sense, that the 5 to 6 different scales with different subject levels and 5 to 6 pages is overwhelming to absorb. And at that point, if you're getting them reading it, it's not going to be effective. So really thinking about how to present data in a real streamlined way. So, and then it goes hand in hand with the next recommendation is centralizing the documentation process. Teachers have worked so hard, and I commend them so much in terms of the amount of time they put into this. And I think that's a testament in terms of how much commitment they have to this. But teachers are spending a lot of their prep time creating these documents, collating them, stapling them. I walked into a classroom and they had all the different boxes where they're putting them all together. And this is hours of time across the building to do so. We have the Aspen system, which is used throughout the district. And it is, what we can do is take the scales, take the report card format that will be more unified and put it on Aspen. And so it could just be sent out, and the laborious work of collating and stapling will be gone. It'll be sent out and it will be much more streamlined. This will also allow a capturing of this. So if you're looking at data from a 612 perspective, this is me sort of getting to that piece of it. You can see trends, you can see things over time, and it's all captured there as well. And last but not least is really looking at that piece of that lack of understanding and confusion, the fear of not being prepared for high school grading systems, and that student motivation piece that I talked about earlier. That was reiterated not only in the parents, but you heard that from alumni. You heard that from some students as well. And how that is really hitting against American culture, and that concept that grades are just endemic. People know grades, and they know them, what they perceive is what an A, B, C, D, F. They seem to know what that is. And also the systemic relationship between the middle school and high school. So how to rectify that? And so the recommendation is to adapt in grade 7 and grade 8 reporting models that includes elements of traditional grading systems. And so what I'm calling that is the middle way, right? Looking at ways of really taking the best elements of SBR, but really keeping in mind these concerns on the lack of understanding, confusion, the fear of not being prepared, and student motivation, and going forward. So in doing that, this middle way is really developing a system of grades reporting that really has two goals on that, and that is to provide students an understanding of traditional grading models by the time that they leave Blake, right? That the kids understand this, that they're not experiencing this for the first time in grade 9, but also to provide parents and guardians an understanding of a child's performance. It's to give them a much more fine-grained understanding. Again, that nebulousness of a 2, like what does that mean? And how can we make that more precise, at least parents feeling that they understand it more? And that other piece is that intuitiveness. I talk about this as almost a foreign language, or a language that a person doesn't know. How can we make that a language that they do know? We know that a lot of parent education is there. We need to think of other models or other ways to get at that intuitiveness, that parents can look at a grade report and sort of get what that means. So those 4 recommendations were based on data collected. And I want to reiterate, it was a snapshot in time. That data ceased being collected pre-pandemic. That was on March 2nd, 2020. Now, the next steps, again, is keep in mind that there's no formal thing. This is something that will need to be developed in concert with not only central office, but Blake leadership and faculty to really think about how grading and the grade reporting will unfold. And that in doing so, in those developments, and keeping in mind that we know that adaptations and modifications have happened since I've collected the data, and acknowledge that, and just making sure that they meet the goals, that if there's been adaptations to the report card model, that if they meet the recommendation, that's fine. We can just make sure we meet the rest of them. So just acknowledging that. And with that, I do want to say that I want to thank everyone in the Blake community for the opportunity to meet with them and to talk with them and to gather data and to listen. It has been an incredible experience. And I, as a person who works here and as a parent and all of that, really respect the time and the effort and the engagement of everyone involved in this. So if you have any specific questions, feel free, definitely school committee, but also if anyone also, they're invited to ask me via email. You can or call, you can contact me as well. So, and with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
You're muted, Jess. And can you remind people that the format of...
I will not miss that. Anna Mae, or I'm sorry, you trying to go ahead and ask a question? Go ahead.
No, I just said if you could please remind the attendees about gens and who they should address their questions to, because this is a workshop and not public comment.
So we are not taking public input at this time, and also for people who have joined late, we are not voting or enacting any part of this kind of decision making. It really, we held this workshop because we knew it was important work. It was something that we were all interested in, and we also knew that there was a large portion of the public that was interested in it as well. And we wanted to give people, the hour that it would take for us to really have an in-depth understanding of what it is. If you have questions about implementation, about timing, about any of it, I would direct those questions directly to Dr. Power at cpower@email.medfield.net, or Dr. Marston, or to Mr. Vaughn. And you can find their emails out there as well. Does anybody in the committee have questions? Megan?
I have a clarifying question for Christine. In regards to the middle way, I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the traditional letter grade would attempt to shed more light on what the 2 or the 3 really is. So, there's a big leeway between, you could be at a 75 at a 2 or an 85 at a 2, just kind of telling you where the middle ground is. And I appreciate that. And I know that in traditional standards-based grading, there is an absence of homework or extra credit. Will the traditional grade kind of reflect that then? Because I see one of the biggest problems, at least in my personal experience and from what I've heard back from parents as they transition to the high school, is this, oh, homework counts for something now. And in the lack of, for better term, unawareness of a parent, who looks at her report card and says, my kid got 3s, he or she is doing fine. And then doesn't really realize what the whole student look like in terms of, does the student do their homework? Is the student participating in class? Do they work collaboratively? All of those social skills that aren't really reflected in the standards-based grade, will that sort of play into what their grade then will be? And I ask this because I feel like I don't want to say setting them up for failure. I feel like as a parent, I really wasn't fully aware of what kind of student my child was, because I just didn't fully understand what the information was telling me. And I regret not being able to step in a little bit faster and say, I need to really reiterate the importance of doing work and talking and advocating for themselves in class, or participating more. And that really kind of, now we're playing catch up in high school. So I guess my question is, will that be incorporated in this middle way? Or are we still going to see the consistently, the oftens, the sometimes, the rarelys, which are also kind of difficult for the parents to understand? Is there a movement towards a narrative maybe, or even, I guess, in 8th grade, more importantly, because of placement into the high school, of having conferences with teachers more formally? Sorry, that was a lot. So
That one question?
that was a lot of questions, but all at once.
I can just address quickly, Christine. So, I mean, I look at, we've talked about what the middle way, I call it a hybrid, Christine calls it a middle way. I think, one of the things that I've seen done successfully is that you can have that traditional grade, but also have standards-based reporting in conjunction with that, so that there's conversion tables, all those kinds of things, that you could have a grade for English, but there could be specific standards that the department decides are important, and you could have the 3-2-1 or the 1-2-3-4 scale underneath those standards. That has been done. I've done it myself as a teacher, and it works pretty well. So I think that's an important thing that we can look toward, so you can preserve the best pieces of standards-based, but also provide the traditional grading system as well. I think that's something that it's a good compromise, a good marriage of the two. And I think that's what we need to, work with Blake and Christine and I and everyone in the faculty to kind of get to what that might look like. As far as homework counting as a grade, that's a conversation. That's a whole conversation in itself. I'm not sure I love that anyway. And I think that's why we have the 6 through 12 professional development in there as part of looking at validity and reliability of grading systems, because there's lots of research around that as well. So I think there was a lot in your question. Each one of these pieces could be like a whole separate workshop, really. But I think what we're trying to look at as a vision is marrying the components of traditional, but preserving the good parts of SBR, so that it's very clear for people. Because when you're 5 years in and you're still hearing the same thing, it's not clear. No matter how many parent things you offer, it's not working well. And I think that's what we have to look at is our stakeholders have concerns, our kids have concerns, and frankly, the teachers have come to me with concerns too. So we need to kind of look at how that works and how we can make it better for everyone.
Oh, go ahead, Leo.
I was going to say, first off, Christine, thank you for all that work. This was obviously a boatload of work, and it's obviously a very sensitive subject to, both as an industry, in our industry, as we're trying to, bring better perspective on assessment and interpreting that and building skills for our learners. So as a practitioner, I completely support the efforts. But I'm also very familiar with changing culture, right? And culture is just, it's not the way we were taught. I failed penmanship in 4th grade. Remember it to this day. Miss Patsos failed me. That's why I got into computers in the first place. And it has that lasting impact on students, right? And that's why we're shifting the narrative as much as we can. So I want to commend the middle school for their efforts in this work. I do feel like the middle way or the hybrid is 100% the best way to connect those dots and understanding, right? So, and it's going to be through practice, right? And it's going to be able to say, these are the standard side of it, and this is the numerical result. And I think there's going to be some powerful ways to make those correlations. And I think that's the work, obviously, that they're already engaged in. So I do want to say, and not having experienced it yet, but in a couple of years I will be. I feel fortunate that it's being addressed now. So and so I hope that the work just continues to make that, bridging that gap, because I think those are some great outcomes of this research and reinforces why we have your position in the district. So I would say this is that next step that we needed. So thank you.
I have one thought, which is that one of the reasons that we began SBR was to kind of identify the authentic learning that kids were doing, but we were also looking at the social emotional piece of the kind of concreteness of grade and what that tells you. So, so there's this interesting question to me around that transition. We've always talked about the transition between Blake and the high school as kind of falling off a cliff or leaping up to a block, or, there's always a kind of a proportional part of it. Is there a way that when we are looking vertically from 6 to 12 around our grading practices, that we are also able to help kids who are transitioning to the kind of more traditional grading practices to see on a more granular level, in a way that is kind of like the 3/4 way around standards-based and what they need to learn to achieve within those first couple of semesters, or even through that first year, so that there's not just this hard stop of SBR at 8th grade, but really we can incorporate it, even if it is not official, within their full learning, that they're able to start taking back some of that reflection at a time in which their developmental skills are a little bit more able to catch the kind of more abstract, less concrete parts of achievement. Does that make sense?
I believe so. Yeah, you're and tell me if I'm answering your question correctly. You're talking to a longtime 9th grade teacher. So I taught for over 10 years, primarily. So I understand in terms of that transition, and that the transition doesn't end in grade 8, that we really need to think about.
Right.
It's nothing happens magically over the summer and all of a sudden they're different getting into 9th grade. So in that, looking in that vertical piece, really looking at it as a 6-12 entity, and that we're looking at that they're moving into this role as being high school students, and what does that mean and how can we support them, but working in the ways that larger piece that Jeff talked about, that we have this larger that your 9-12 scores are being reported to colleges as well. So there's ways to support kids from an SEL standpoint for sure, and that's something we definitely have to focus on. But to I believe, hopefully answering your question, really thinking about that, this is not a 6-8, this is more of a 6-12 question for us to really talk about, and that's why you see that in the PD.
Just kind of easing their way out of the kind of hybrid system, and yet still being able to use the rubrics that they have always known,
right,
in both of those, to be able to kind of level up so that as they do get to that 10th, 11th grade, 12th grade, you
And-
know, intensity.
And that's to
of the
have
grit.
opportunities. And I mentioned common language and common experiences, because it's important for them not to have this separate, you know, Blake PD and high school PD, for them to work together and have those conversations. They are happening, but to help facilitate those even more. And that, I don't know if that's the 3/4 piece that you're looking at.
I think that's kind of the 3/4 piece I'm looking at, that, you know, like we transition out of everything, right? Very rarely do we just say, okay, this is it and move on. So within the grading piece and the assessment piece, I think there's some more use around, some more room for a reflection at the 9th grade level, as they kind of like, what do you need to do to get to 10th grade, to be getting those things, to be doing this in the high school way. So bridging there would be really helpful with this as well. Because I do think that there are parts of SBR that have been very valuable, but I do think that you lose yourself in that nebulous too. And not knowing where you are on the bell curve, where your kid is on the bell curve within the 2, and to, you know, like kind of get to the end of the school year and still be pulling 2s. And then there's no kind of addressing the fact that that 2 still sits there, kind of is a failing of the system as well. So, I saw you had your.
I have just a couple comments, and one the report I think was very well done. So thanks for the time. It was thorough. It was clear, and it was very, very well done. I also, I mean, to Nat and the folks in the middle school, you know, I mean, there's so much thought that has gone into this, with, you know, echoing what Jeff says over and over, think of our kids first. Not only thought, but obviously time and effort, and that's time away from their families. So I think it was, I applaud the work that has gone in. I look at the 4 recommendations and I think of it as, number 4 almost drives everything else, right? If you're going to have PD or uniformity or consistency with Aspen, we're going to have to figure out what 4 is, and then build around it. And so when I look at the next step, you know, I'm immediately thinking, okay, so is there a checkpoint, or like when we start thinking about re-implementing, are we thinking towards next year? And you know, just generally, and I don't know whether it's Jeff to you or Christine, how does the next chapter unfold? How are you guys looking at it?
So we had talked about, you know, regrouping after vacation and have those conversations with Nat and Kelly and see where we're going in that regard, and then involving the faculty as well. But again, this is another really good example of why R&D is so important to this district and the work that happens over the summer. We see this as an opportunity to do some of this work over the summer and continue some of this work over the summer. And depending on where we land with that would depend on whether or not what the next school year looks like. But that's what our plan is to regroup, get together, and start looking at how we can do some of the recommendations. Or, I mean, because we're not, you know, the recommendation could be throw it out completely and we're never doing it again, right? That could have been a recommendation, but it's not. It's preserving the good parts and the good work that our teachers have done with this, but also incorporating a more traditional way at 7th and 8th grade, so that our stakeholders and the feedback that we've gotten over the years is attended to. So I think that's an important piece, that no one's saying that this has been 5 years of wasted time, we're throwing it all out. That's not the case. I mean, if you look at, our kids are still doing well in high school, but we need to make sure that you know, the kids have been going through this, are still doing well in high school. We need to just make sure that experience for everyone involved, the 3 stakeholders, is a positive one. And we still think we need to make some tweaks to make that happen. I think that's what we're going to be doing with central office and the Blake staff and teachers and administration, to kind of, you know, make those tweaks to make it more successful for everyone.
You know, I actually remember the time Nat came to the school committee not to propose, to explain the rollout for standard-based reporting, and the whole committee. I mean, it's just, there's such richness in the feedback and, you know, in targeting what the students really need. But so I don't see this, and thank you, Christine, for this work. I don't see this as a defeat to the whole SBR process, and I believe that there is still richness there, and I'm so grateful to Nat and his team for diving deeper. But culturally, it's really hard, to really fully embrace this. I think the education piece, the PD piece, the parent education piece, it's just is all needed. But I do think this hybrid would work for us without completely losing it. But I do want to mention the college thing a little bit, because now I'm moving into my third kid looking into colleges. And it's funny, I went to one talk with the director of admissions at UVM, and he said, everyone's across the board in this country. You've got the traditional schools, you've got the home schools, you've got some schools going into like images of animals. There's a lot of crazy out there. So, colleges do recognize that, but I just think our culture here especially is not fully embracing it just yet. But anyways, so I thank you. I do think the hybrid would be a good thing. And you're considering that for really the 7th and 8th, and keeping 6th the same? Yeah. All right. That's how I read it. And I'm so impressed you got that word. Jess had mentioned it last night, gestalt, in your report. I was like, whoa.
I think gestalt should be thrown into virtually every conversation that it can.
Another thing, and now I'd really be curious to hear what Nat has to say about this, have him.
And I think that we should have conversations about that, but we really weren't going to be bringing him over.
No, I know that, but just future conversations with Nat Vaughn would be really helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to mention to folks, and I'm not closing down our conversation yet, but I do want to mention to people that Christine did this report, and it will be posted to the Medfield TV YouTube channel. However, there is a wider and much longer research report that really outlines her methodology and goes into much even deeper detail. And that will be available as well, right? So, and that if you have questions about rollout, about concept, about who gets what, when, all of these kinds of, concerns, again, I would please refer those questions to Dr. Power, to Mr. Vaughn, or to Dr. Marsden. Again, the school committee, we did this workshop because we wanted to understand more about this. And that this is a much longer conversation than just this 1 hour. But we wanted to give it the time that it truly deserved, because it is such an important conversation for all of our kids. What is the balance between achievement and understanding what that achievement means and having it be authentic? So within the committee, do I have more comments or questions, or with Dr. Marsden or Dr. Power, any closing statements or thoughts?
I think we could go on and on on this subject for a long time. So I think it's, and unfortunately I do have to go, but I think it's something that perhaps, and I don't know how this is done, like some sort of part of student council or school council of some kind, some sort of advisory with parents and people in this transition process of finding the middleware, being able to identify the communication streams that Megan even brought up there back and forth, and how those can be formalized. I love the idea of making sure this gets into Aspen, right? Because the data collection side of it, so you can reflect and aggregate. Obviously, that's my wheelhouse. So, but I think that process, so it's understandable for parents, and so that they have a feedback loop or a question, that it's understandable in that process, I think might be helpful. So not to add anything else to the plate, but I'm sure there's some sort of, I'm sure Nat already has some sort of team, and just perhaps it's repurposing or directing that team on this particular tasks. So just to address those things that Megan brought up. So, and with that, Thank you again for all your work.
Mute. I will not miss the mute part. So with that, any other questions? Any other observations? No. Okay, then I'm going to say that I feel fairly comfortable calling for a motion to close the meeting. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
To adjourn? Sorry, I forgot my words. I can use gestalt, but I can't remember adjourn. Okay, so Anna May, adjourn, and do I have a second?
Second.
All right, Leo Brem, and then I'll do a roll call. As always, Leo Brem
Aye.
and Tim Knight.
Aye.
And Megan Glenn
Aye.
and Anna May Shea Brooke
Aye.
and Jessica Riley. Aye. Our next meeting for the school committee will be on May 6th at 7 p.m. And the meeting is adjourned at 11:15. Thank you ever so much. And again,
Have a
if
great
you
break,
have
everybody.
questions,
Ciao. Thank you.
Yes.
See you.
reach out to central office. Thank you.